3-hour lecture yesterday on astrology, so if I start talking about stars and zodiac signs, just let me know. But today I'm going to try to take a quick tour all around the state. We won't get to every corner of the state, but I'll hit on quite a few of them. I've given you all a map. The library was gracious enough to make copies of for everyone. It's a map you can get a color version of on the Pennsylvania DCNR website. If you just Google it, Physiographic Map of Pennsylvania, or you can type in the map number either on Google or on the website, the DCNR website, and it will pop up a nice color version that you can print out. So I always like to give a little introduction to geography when I give my talks, because not a lot of us in the U.S. have had a good background in geography. I think I had a 6-month class or a 3-month, one semester geography class in the 8th grade, and then I had them in college. So geography, I like to say, is a perspective. It's a way of looking at the world. It looks at it spatially, so you're looking at locations, places, regions, and the relationships between them. Anything spatial can be studied by a geographer. So if you're talking about baseball games, or baseball teams, or what people eat for Sunday dinner, or what religions are in a particular part of the world, all of those things have a spatial component to them that they can be studied geographically. So unlike a lot of specialized disciplines, geography synthesizes a lot of different subjects. And the one thing that unifies all of it is this spatial perspective. The origins of the world of the word geography are geo and gaia and graphein. So in Greek, these mean the earth, and describing, writing, or mapping. So literally, geography means to describe, write about, and map the earth. And that's exactly what geographers do. I'm going to be talking a lot about regions tonight. The map is a map of regions, geographic regions. When I looked up that word, physiographic, it just said geographic. I was like, oh, that's what that means. I never knew that. Okay, so it's geographic regions of the state, and it's based on the geology underneath the surface and also the surface features. So all of the physical characteristics of the landscape, primarily the non-human aspects of the landscape. But as we see, and as we study in geography, there's a lot of interaction between the physical landscape and the people that live on it. So regions are concepts that are put onto a map. They're a way that geographers organize areas. And a region has some kind of a boundary around it. It can be a very distinct boundary, or it can be very fuzzy. It can change over time or be very fixed in place. So state and county boundaries are very fixed in place. Boundaries like regions between baseball team fans of Baltimore Orioles versus fans of Yankees versus fans of the Phillies, those can be much more fluid. Or people who read this newspaper or that newspaper, those can be much more fluid. They're usually contiguous. That means it's in one, bounded by one boundary, but it doesn't have to be. The United States, of course, has Alaska and Hawaii, which are outside of the contiguous United States. I believe all the boundaries that we'll be looking at, or the regions we'll be looking at today, are contiguous. And basically, a region is just defined by a set of characteristics which are similar within the region and distinguish it somehow from the other regions. So we'll keep that in mind as we're looking at these different regions of Pennsylvania tonight. Okay, so here's an example. This is actually a postcard I bought when I was a kid. If you look carefully at the pictures, you can tell they're kind of old. I bought one a few years ago, which looks significantly different. I don't have that one in my PowerPoints yet. So this is a good way to think about places and regions, right? You have some image associated with them. So you have the coal mines up around Hazleton, the iron and steel around Pittsburgh. You have hiking in central Pennsylvania, the forests in northern Pennsylvania, paper making up by Johnsonburg. A lot of different regions there. Cabbage growing. Apparently they grow a lot of cabbages in northwestern Pennsylvania. So it's very interesting. It's interesting to see how these change over time. Okay. So keep that in mind. Here's another set of regions. These we call vernacular regions because they're regions that exist in the popular imagination, but they're not very carefully defined on the map. I have a picture from a study that was done by some colleagues of mine when I was a graduate student in Nebraska. And they collected 50 different versions of a map of the Great Plains. And there were 50 different lines drawn on the map. So the Great Plains is an example of one of those regions that everybody knows about what it is like and where it is, but nobody knows exactly where it is. So these regions are good examples of that.
Excuse me, sir.
Sometimes I like to give my students a blank map of Pennsylvania and this list, and I say, just go home and put in all of these names somewhere. Or you can find them and put them in somewhere. So you just give you a sense of how well you know the state. I want to show this map before we get into the regular part of the lecture because it's a little different from all of the other maps. This is a map of watersheds. I got really obsessed with these watershed maps a couple of years ago, and I drew a map of all the rivers in Pennsylvania. Basically, it's different because, well, as you'll see in the next map, most of the state follows the underlying geography and geology. But the rivers run much more directly north and south. And they cut through ridges rather than run along them. So this is a little different map from the other maps that we'll be looking at. Okay. You've got the Delaware River watershed in the east. The main one in the middle is the Susquehanna River watershed. The Potomac River watershed goes into south central Pennsylvania, a very beautiful area in the Ridge and Valley. And of course in the west you have the Ohio River watershed, which is primarily drained by the Allegheny River and the Monongahela River. This is the Allegheny and this is the Ohio once they come together there on the Beaver River. We also have a tiny portion of the Genesee River watershed, and that's right up here, and that drains into Lake Ontario. A watershed is simply all of the land that's drained by a river, or a set of rivers. So all of the rivers in the Susquehanna River watershed feed into the Susquehanna River, which has two main branches. The north branch here, and the west branch here. And they come together at Sunbury, Northumberland, flow down to Harrisburg, and then all of it drains into the Chesapeake Bay. Delaware River changes into the Delaware Bay, Potomac River also into the Chesapeake Bay. Ohio River into Mississippi, which flows down to the Gulf of Mexico, the Genesee River, as I said, into Lake Ontario. So there's one point where the star is in north central Pennsylvania. It's the only point east of Mississippi, maybe east of the Rockies, where three rivers, or three different watersheds come together that all run into very different bodies of water. So this is called a divide. You probably heard about the Continental Divide. In the west, it divides the waters that flow into Mississippi from those that flow in toward the Pacific Ocean. Well, this is a divide that divides waters that end up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. And that's what it looks like. It's a hayfield on top of a rise. So if you're into those out-of-the-way tourist destinations that nobody else goes to, this is a good one. Okay, so here's the map, simplified version of the map that I handed out to you. So I thought we'd start with that. Geographic regions we'll be talking about are the Atlantic Coastal Plain, the Piedmont, the Blue Ridge and New England Mountains, the Ridge and Valley, and the Appalachian Plateaus, as well as a little strip of the central lowland. Those are the main physiographic provinces in Pennsylvania. And then the map that you have from the DCNR subdivides them into smaller and smaller regions. If you have a question, just raise your hand, let me know. I don't mind interactive lectures. No, let me get this direction. Okay, the Pennsylvania Piedmont, this is the area that we live in. It's subdivided into several regions. But basically, it's a rolling lowland, hills, valleys, nothing too extreme. It has a lot of historical areas. It also has a lot of industry and a lot of people. The Ridge and Valley. This is an area, if you drive through it, you'll notice these long, narrow ridges and these long, narrow valleys between them. There's some very beautiful overlooks. This is from the top of Tuscarora Ridge in south central Pennsylvania, looking out on one of the valleys and then out onto the Great Valley, which is a larger section we'll talk about later. A lot of small towns. This is Huntington, down on the Juniata River in south central Pennsylvania, south of State College. And this is on the top of the ridge on Jack's Mountain, kind of southeast of Lewisburg, or Lewistown, rather. The way that you get from one valley to the other is often through a gap, almost a ridge, a gap. And the gap can have a stream flowing through it, or it can be dry, in which case it's called a wind gap. If there's a stream flowing through it, it's called a water gap. But the gaps are the primary way that people get from, and have always gotten from one ridge to another. As you can see from these pictures, going up over the top of the ridges takes a lot of work. The Appalachian Plateau. It looks like a lot like the Ridge and Valley, except I like to say the mountains. I always put that in quotes in case someone from Colorado or California is here. The mountains are shaped a little more like, you know, when you make dinner rolls and you put them in the oven, they kind of expand and run into each other, so you get these big mountains that are all running into each other. That's kind of what the mountains in the plateau look like, whereas the Ridge and Valley are these long, narrow ridges that run for tens of miles, sometimes over 100 miles. This is probably the most picture I took in one of the most isolated towns of any size, any substantial size. This is Renovo in north central Pennsylvania. It was built there because it was a railroad town where railroads would gather and make repair railroads and train cars. It gets a little hard to think sometimes when you're standing up front. But it's there because of the railroads, and of course the railroads are gone now, so there's not a lot going on in town, but it's a cool place to drive through. Oil City, which was one of the towns at the center right at the beginning of the oil industry, the global oil industry. The Pennsylvania Lumber Museum, which I'll mention again, and Pittsburgh, it's also in this region. And this is a bridge you've all driven over if you've gone on I-80 through western Pennsylvania. It is the only bridge in the state that goes over parts of 3 counties, because there's a little sliver of Armstrong County that comes up between Butler and Jefferson counties that runs underneath this bridge. So you actually go over part of 3 counties when you drive over that bridge. we'll talk about the other ones, the Blue Ridge, down around Gettysburg, Shippensburg, that area, and the Reading Prong, which is the area around Reading, all the way over to Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. So you notice there are also mountains around these areas. And they're part of an older mountain chain. The Atlantic Coastal Plain on the left, Philadelphia, which is a really nice job of putting some parkways and walkways in along the, some green along the Schuylkill River. And down at Cape May Point, southernmost tip of New Jersey, it's the same physiographic region. It's flat. It means it's just sediment that's been collected underneath. It's not rock. That's why you get lots of potholes in areas of Philadelphia. And if you go all the way over to the other side of the plateau, so here's the Atlantic Coastal Plain. If you go all the way over the other corner of the state on the back side of the plateau, you get the central lowlands. And this goes all around the Great Lakes and through the Ohio, Mississippi, and Missouri River valleys. So it's a huge province. It takes up most of the central part of the continent. This is the escarpment that marks the end of the plateau. There are a lot of grapes growing along those slopes. And then this is looking from the top of the escarpment down onto the narrow plain before you get to Lake Erie. So those are the basic regions of the state. And we're just going to go into more detail with this throughout the rest of the lecture. Any questions so far? Okay, so here's the map that I gave you. There's a nice color version that you can all hopefully access and download and print. See the Piedmont province here, so all of these purple areas here, coastal plain. Here's the New England province, or Reading Prong, and South Mountain, or the Blue Ridge province. Great Valley, something we'll talk about. That's technically part of Appalachia, but it's very much connected to the Piedmont. And then you have the ridges and valleys. And that's all these blue areas here. The Allegheny Front and Allegheny Escarpment divide the ridge and valley from the plateau. Plateau are all these orange and green sections, including the Pocono Plateau, which is right here. Some have been glaciated, and others have not. And then you have the coastal province up here. So I got started on this whole geography thing when I was taking classes to become a volunteer naturalist at Bones Hill up in Bucks County. And so they handed out this map and I just got obsessed with it. So I started looking into it, and I've been looking into it for 10 years and just driving around the state, taking pictures, exploring these areas, reading about them, buying books, and it just keeps evolving and growing. Okay. Let's start with the two little mountain sections in the east. About 1 billion years ago, there were mountains that formed in what later became eastern North America. So these are pretty old rocks. The Earth, they say, is about 4.5 billion years old. So that's going to be these two areas that are pointed out on the map. And these are places where the rocks that were part of those mountains are still coming up to the surface. The mountains themselves aren't part of the original mountains, but the rocks underneath them are. The mountains themselves have been formed and reformed many times. And these mountains are part of an extended chain includes the Green Mountains of Vermont, the Taconics of western Massachusetts, the Redding Prong in Pennsylvania, South Mountain, the Blue Ridge, all the way down to the Great Smokies. It's all the same origin for all of these different mountains, different ranges. The geography of the region, especially the southern part, the Blue Ridge Province, South Mountain, between Gettysburg and Chambersburg, is especially suited for growing apple orchards. Sorry, the picture is pretty dark. The sun was really bright, so it was hard to get a good picture. But the hill is covered in apple trees. And the reason for this is that the slope, the sides of the slope, create the ideal balance between warmth and coolness. So it's cool enough on the sides of the hills that in early spring that the trees won't come out soon in the spring. So they'll avoid an early season frost or a late season frost. But then it's also high enough up that the cold air drains down into the valley. And so it protects them from exceptionally cold air. And then in the fall, it stays warm enough for them to extend the growing season a bit. So you'll often see orchards and vineyards along the sides of slopes. And particularly in near a lake, near a large lake, which also helps moderate the temperatures, or in a slightly mountainous area, like South Mountain. Very picturesque area, a lot of historic areas. This has been settled for a long time. Okay, let's switch over to the Redding Prong. The pagoda is up on top of the Redding. I always get lost going around Redding. I can never get the highways to hook up right for me. So I end up somewhere down in Redding, and I just look up to the pagoda, and I keep winding through the city until keeping the pagoda on my left until I get down to 422. So it's a useful landmark for me. Gives a great view of the valley, and it's up on top of one of these hills, which is part of the leftover mountain chain that formed 1 billion years ago. You also see these mountains if you're driving up the center of Berks County. I take my class on a field trip up the Hawk Mountain when we're learning about these different provinces. And so we take 422 up until it comes off the end of the expressway, and then just about a mile down the road, 662 goes off to the right. And that goes right up the center of Berks County. As you're driving up through there, through the Butter Valley, you start to see these hills come up on the right. And that's the Redding Prong as well. Great Valley section. This is technically the first part of Appalachia. It's a wide, narrow valley, or a wide valley. It has hills in it too, but broadly speaking, it's a valley. And it runs for many miles north and south through Pennsylvania and on into other states. It was a very useful area for settlers, and it has good soil for farming. So I drove out Route 30 one winter to visit some friends in Cleveland, because everybody goes to Cleveland in the middle of winter, right? When I was driving on Route 30, I got to this point near the Ridge and Valley, where I looked back and you could see South Mountain in the distance, and you turned around and you could see the first ridge of the Ridge and Valley ahead of you. So that was pretty neat. It's a beautiful area. There's a lot of scenic areas in the Great Valley. Okay. So the Great Valley is part of this region here, provided it is this region. The Great Appalachian Valley is the full name of it. So it goes all the way from Alabama, up between the Ridge and Valley and the Smokies, all the way up through Virginia, into Pennsylvania, up in New York. It connects with the Mohawk Valley and the Champlain Valley up to the St. Lawrence Valley. And the only place, okay, it's called three things in Pennsylvania. The eastern end is the Lehigh Valley, the middle part is the Lebanon Valley, and the western and southernmost part is the Cumberland Valley. So if you might be familiar with those names. The only place along this whole set of mountains and the Great Valley where there's a real break in the mountains is in Pennsylvania. And so that became a really important route for both for European settlers who were looking to go somewhere else after the lands along the eastern seaboard were filling up. And it was also a good route for indigenous populations who also wanted to leave the crowded European settlements along the eastern seaboard. And basically what people would do is to cut through this part of Pennsylvania and then head south down the Great Valley. Daniel Boone was one of the first ones to do this. And his family cut through the Cumberland Gap, which is where Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee come together. And from there, the settlers could go into the Tennessee River Valley, up into the Ohio Valley, and into the Midwest and Great Lakes region. The French, when they settled, came down the St. Lawrence River into the Great Lakes and accessed the Midwest that way. But the English European settlers along the eastern seaboard primarily came across the mountains, where this was a much easier way to get into the Midwest, going south along the Great Valley and then through the Cumberland Gap. Okay, so Daniel Boone. If you drive out 422, there's a sign that points to the west a few miles. There's the Daniel Boone Homestead. That's where he spent some time as a boy. They have a lot of outdoor buildings. They have an old house, which was added on to since he had grown up there. But there's one part of it down at the end, which is part of the original house. And they do some wonderful living history things out there. They grow flax and spin it and make their clothes from it. They cook over the hearth. They have all the old recipes. They tell you what it was like, living in the winter closed up in a house with bacon fat lamps burning and people not, bathing for a month. They really get into it. They know everything about it. So it's a cool place to visit. There are a lot of cities and towns in the Great Valley in Pennsylvania. So all of these, including Harrisburg, Nesbitt, Reading, Allentown, Bethlehem, as well as Easton, Nazareth, Lebanon, Hershey, Carlisle, and Chambersburg. And there was a reason that so many towns are in the Great Valley. Basically, colonial Pennsylvania was owned by the Penn family. It was their business. And William Penn and his sons and other parts of the family developed their colony in such a way that Philadelphia would not be competed against by other towns and cities in the region. So they allowed Philadelphia to become the primary economic center of the colony. And they discouraged settlements from growing within a day's wagon ride of Philadelphia. So it was the backcountry area out past that, maybe 50 miles out, which developed in the 1700s along with Philadelphia. And the area in between didn't really fill in until the late 1700s, around the 1800s. So places like Coatesville and Norristown, Phoenixville, Downingtown, Doylestown, those areas really didn't grow into more significant population centers until later in the 1700s, whereas a lot of these towns were founded in the early mid-1700s. Okay, so pictures from the Lehigh Valley. This is a view from the south overlook at Hawk Mountain, looking back into the Great Valley. Beautiful place if you can get up there. They now have a fully accessible trail from the visitor center up to the South Mountain overlook, or South Overlook. This is Lebanon Valley. See a lot of bicyclists on these roads when they drive out there. It's very pretty. Nice rolling landscape. A lot of farms and older historic homes as well. The Cumberland Valley. So here's Chambersburg, or Carlisle or Chambersburg. These are the ridges of the Ridge Valley. And then this is South Mountain here, part of the Blue Ridge Province. So the Great Valley is this wide area. Here's the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So if you're driving west from Harrisburg, you go for a long ways through the Great Valley. And then you come up to the tunnel through the mountains here. I think it's Blue Mountain Tunnel, or is that the one in 476? This is part of a map, one of my favorite atlases, which is the Dolores Atlas. So they still do publish these. They used to have them on CDs, but another company bought them. I think maybe Rand McNally bought them or something, and they stopped publishing them on CDs. But they still, last I heard, they were still publishing the paper version. It has a lot of information about recreational areas at the beginning, different places to visit, and the maps themselves, you're not going to use them for navigating through a city. This is a great map to use, an atlas to use for the backcountry. It basically has all the roads, the natural areas, natural features. It's a really fun map to have. Show you this while we're at it. This is the National Geographic Atlas of Pennsylvania. This is also a really nice one, especially for state parks and natural areas and other places you might want to explore, and the atlas part is a little easier to read too. So I have several Pennsylvania atlases. They're all a little bit different, so I bring like 3 or 4 of them along when I go on a trip, and I can compare and plan trips using all of them. Okay, here's the western edge of the Cumberland Valley. Looking for Mercersburg Academy, which is an elite school in south central Pennsylvania. Originally I originally believe it was Marshall College, and then they merged with Franklin College, and they moved out of Mercersburg, and it was a theological seminary for a while and became a private school. Broad Mountain, Front Mountain, one of some of the first mountains in the Ridge and Valleys. You're driving west on Route 30. And then this is Cove Mountain back here, and in Cove Gap was where Pennsylvania's only president was born, James Buchanan. I don't know why he left the valley. It's beautiful back there. It's a really nice place. And basically it was a transfer place for freight that was being delivered by wagon over the mountains. Also in the Cumberland Valley, I came across the Kanakachi Institute, which is kind of like a living history area. And have a lot of different buildings that they've brought there, and farms, old gardens, and some natural areas with trails in it. It gives you a sense of the natural history of the area. It's kind of fun. Okay, so we've talked about riding from South Mountain and the Great Valley. Now I want to take a look at this area again called the Pennsylvania Piedmont. There are 3 different sections. The upland section, there is, actually here's a non-contiguous region. The Piedmont lowland actually has this long narrow valley here, and then this much broader area in mostly in northern Lancaster County. And then there's the Gettysburg, York lowland, sometimes also called the Triassic lowland. Montgomery County and Delaware County. So this is our area. The Piedmont region was the first area of Pennsylvania to be settled. Much of it was occupied by 1720. All of it, plus the Great Valley, was essentially initially settled by 1740. The largest cities are Philadelphia and then Lancaster. Another thing that you can see in this map is that the southeast filled up relatively quickly, but it took a long time to get across those ridges and to get into the central part of the state. And the north central part of the state wasn't settled until the 1800s. The peak area up here was the late 1800s, and they cleared out pretty quickly. About 20 years later, people started leaving. So a couple pictures of the Piedmont upland. I don't think they do this anymore, but 2 years ago you could drive up to the top of the landfill at the border boundary between Chester and Lancaster counties. You get a good view of the Piedmont from up there. It's the town of Honeybrook. And pretty similar view when you're driving east on Route 30 in York County. Yeah, it's just what we're familiar with, right? The Piedmont lowland, there's not a lot of difference between the upland and lowland, a couple hundred feet. The lowland generally has these broad valleys, but these hills in the background are part of it too. The Piedmont lowland is the rich agricultural region of Lancaster County that everyone knows about, called Dutch country, Pennsylvania Dutch country. That's the Piedmont lowland, all the Amish farms there. The other part of the Piedmont lowland is the Chester Valley. On my way out here, I was driving Route 23 through Valley Forge Park. I was driving right on the edge of the Triassic lowlands, and if I were to drive a little farther on that, I would go up along the edge of Chester Valley. If you drive west on Route 30 on the bypass, you'll go up this long hill, this long incline. You're climbing out of the Chester Valley. And if you go to King of Prussia, you come down the hills toward the mall. That's the Chester Valley. King of Prussia is in the Chester Valley. Coatesville is in the Chester Valley. All those developments along Route 30 that were built during the 1970s are in the Chester Valley. Valleys form because the rock underneath them is limestone. Limestone is relatively soft and it is dissolvable by water. There's a weak acid in water that over time will dissolve, will break down limestone. So if you have a lot of limestone in there, you get caverns and caves and sinkholes. And there's not enough of that to have those features in the Chester Valley, but there are quite a few caves and caverns up in central Pennsylvania and other parts of the state. So limestone, because it's more easily eroded than other rocks like sandstone or conglomerate, which is just a bunch of pebbles cemented together, those will form valleys, whereas the sandstone will become hills. It's just because water can wear away the limestone and it can't wear away the sandstone as much. So you end up with hills and you end up with valleys. So the Chester Valley is often inaccurately called Great Valley. By comparison, the Great Valley is just a little bit greater than the Chester Valley. But you'll see the name Great Valley, including Great Valley High School, and a lot of other Great Valley Shopping Center. There's a lot of uses of the name in this area here. It kind of looks like a pipe. You know, it's a little pipe bowl there and a long stem. The Piedmont is a really important area culturally, too. Remember I told you how all the settlers went through the Great Valley. They left the Piedmont, went into the Great Valley, moved south, and then into the Midwest. So they brought along things like the Conestoga wagon and the log cabin, all of which kind of began in southeastern Pennsylvania. And those things spread throughout the country. So I lived in Nebraska for 10 years. And on the state highway signs, the symbol that they use for this around the route number is a Conestoga wagon. Those Conestoga wagons originated in southeastern Pennsylvania, in Conestoga roads throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. That's because settlers from this area took them and moved to other parts of the country. So geographers call this a cultural hearth. So southeastern Pennsylvania, the Piedmont, the Great Valley, it's a cultural, Euro-American cultural hearth in North America. It's one of several cultural hearths. Another one is New England. Another is the tidewater areas in southeast. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Just mention a little bit about rocks here. There are several different categories of rocks. Igneous is the ones formed from fire, from lava, from melted material. The other kinds are sedimentary, which is formed just from sediment that over time accumulates and gets cemented together into a rock. And a third kind is metamorphic. Metamorphic is rocks that haven't melted, but they've been subjected to a lot of heat and pressure. And the heat and the pressure kind of change the crystalline structure of the rocks, changes their chemistry. It's the same materials in them, but how they're put together changes. So example of sedimentary rock is graphite, which is just sheets of carbon. So when you write with a pencil, you're just separating the sheets of carbon from one another and leaving some on the paper. Anybody know the metamorphic equivalent of graphite? Heard of diamonds? So rather than being in sheets of carbon, a diamond is bound in all directions. So the carbon atoms are linked to all the other carbon atoms around it, which makes it the hardest mineral on Earth. Okay. Same thing, they're both made of carbon, just carbon. But the way that the mineral is constructed, is structured, is different. So oftentimes you'll get sedimentary rocks that have been in areas, they build up along shores and in shallow water areas and in slightly deeper sea areas. And then if there's some mountain building going on, if those sedimentary rocks are in an area where continents start coming together and building mountains like they are in the Himalayas now, then the rock is subjected to that heat and pressure, and it turns into a metamorphic rock. And so there are a lot of metamorphic rocks in southeastern Pennsylvania. Once you move farther west, it's more sedimentary. And this is important because it's shaped the kind of use that people can make of the land. So a couple hundred years ago, it was a lot easier to travel on water than it was over land. But in Pennsylvania, it was hard to travel on water unless you had a really shallow, specially built boat, because the rocks underneath the rivers are very hard metamorphic rocks. And so the water can't carve out a channel very easily. So they ended up building a lot of canals. So this is the Susquehanna River down south of Route 30, and this is the canal that was built next to it. And it's built, you see a lot of chunks of metamorphic schist lying around on the ground. Geographers talk about site and situation. Site means the place itself and its characteristic. Situation is how it's related to other places around it. And if you look at the site of Harrisburg, it's on a river, but the river is shallow, so ships can't go on the river. The Delaware River is the same way north of Trenton. If it weren't for that particular site characteristic, Harrisburg would be a fantastic port city, and it would probably be as big as Pittsburgh, maybe even Philadelphia, because it's got all of the resources of the farms from the southeast and the forests up in the north, and it's right there in the Great Valley, which links to a lot of other parts of the country. It is a major transportation hub, that region. And friends of mine that live there, say the pollution is pretty bad from all the trucks and the interstates. But it's not a major port city, and that's just because of the geology. Lancaster is also influenced by the geology. It was laid out by James Hamilton. It began its role as the county seat of Lancaster County on May 10, 1729. Astrologers like those precise dates because then they can make a chart and make up stories about the place and understand it. Lancaster is unique because it was the only major town in America, in colonial America, that was not situated on a river or along a coast. There's Conestoga Creek, but that's not very big. It flows through it on the way to Susquehanna. It was entirely dependent on roads and canals for connections to other cities and towns. It was the only one that grew away from a river or the coastline. That's really significant and really interesting. And it's all because of the geology again. So Pennsylvania developed a lot of turnpikes and they built a lot of canals. And I'm talking the early colonial version of a turnpike, where it was a plank road or a dirt road, and somebody tried to charge money for using it so that they could maintain it. And a lot of these lasted for a little while and then they went out of business. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about geology. We talked about 1 billion years ago, there was the Grenville orogeny, or mountain building episode. This was what created the Blue Ridge and Redding Pond, the rocks underneath those. It pulled apart, and then you have some island arcs, a little bit of a chain of islands, like you have off the coast of Asia, for instance, of Japan and the other islands there. And they start moving in, and they glom on to eastern North America. And then another thing comes over, and that starts heading for us, and that gloms onto North America as well. And then Africa comes in. Africa and Europe come in and merge with North and South America, and this creates Pangaea. Okay, this is the one that really is significant for us, because it's what created the Appalachian Mountains. This is what's going on with that. This is kind of like India and Asia, the way it is there now. So think of this as being like the Himalayas or Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We're right in the middle of all this mountain building, and we're up about 10, 12,000 feet or more. There are dinosaurs skiing down slopes and things like that. And then gradually, Pangaea began to break up. And whenever something pulls apart, the rocks tend to slip downward, and that created this rift valley, which leads to the last bit of our map, which is the Triassic lowlands. So that very, very quick run through 4 mountain building episodes, and the most significant, the one that left behind some rocks in the Blue Ridge and the New England Mountains, and the other significant one is the last one, which is the Allegheny orogeny, or mountain building event, and that is what created the Appalachians. Yeah, 10, 12,000 feet higher. Yeah. They've had a lot of time to get worn down. And some geographers and geologists even think they were worn down completely. And then the land kind of rose up a little, and the water carved out mountains again. But they certainly got worn down near flat. So this was about 300 to 220 million years ago. And here's the continent of Pangaea, so you can see northern eastern Africa coming right into the eastern coast of North America. South America is here, and southern sub-Saharan Africa. And all of the other continents were attached together. In the 1960s, they mapped out magnetic stripes on the seafloor. There was a ship called the Glomar Challenger, the Glomar Explorer. It's a really interesting story. And they saw that there was a line of a fissure in the bottom of the ocean, and that there were parallel magnetic stripes on either side of that. And from that, they concluded that the land was moving apart in that area. And from that developed plate tectonics theory, which is basically an idea that is still not completely understood. But the idea is that there are kind of these conveyor belts of magma that circulate underneath the surface of the Earth. And they push the plates around, which is a thin layer that the continents are made up of, and the bottoms of the oceans are made up of. And they push those plates around, and so they move around and get earthquakes and volcanoes. And over time, these continents come apart, reform, push together. It's not really understood at a lot of depth what exactly causes that and what exactly the mechanism is, but I like to think of it as just these kind of convection currents underneath the surface, and they're like conveyor belts that push these parts of the surface around. Kind of explains it. You can see the force of this mountain building event if you look at some rock outcrops. And a particularly good one is the one along Route 322 as you're driving up between Harrisburg and State College. So just so you don't have to, I stuck my camera out the window and snapped a quick picture as I was driving 70 miles an hour around 322. Okay. And there's a couple interesting things about this. One, you see how folded these rock layers are, and again, it's a little dark, but basically, if you think back to that picture of the sedimentary rocks, all the layers are nice and flat. These are not flat, right? They're folded almost in half, and they go like this. That was the force of continents coming together and bending these rock layers like the folds in an accordion. Okay, so this is all how it's explained scientifically. The other thing that's neat that you can see in this picture is that the top of the folds is not the top of the hill, which says that these mountains, these hills that you're driving through are not the original ones. So as if it weren't complicated enough, all of these coming together and splitting apart the continents and building mountains and wearing them down, there's another level to it. Because the rocks underneath don't match the topography or the surface contours. So we'll get to that. Gettysburg, New York lowland. Okay. That is the area, I believe we are in this part right now. I haven't been in Phoenix. I did teach a class in Phoenixville once, but it's not an area that is on my route to drive through regularly, so I'm not completely up on the geography, but I believe we're in this Gettysburg, New York lowland section. So when the continent of Pangaea started separating after all those mountains were built, and it starts moving apart, you have this rift valley opening up, and these giant blocks start sliding downwards and pulling apart. And as the valley opened up, sediment started coming off the mountains and accumulating in the valley. So water hits, it freezes, thaws, breaks up the rocks, starts getting washed down, collects down in the valley. Every once in a while, the sea comes in, then it retreats. And so the sediments are accumulating, and the water's coming in and out of this valley. And so all of the iron fragments in the rock that were the rock sediment that was settling in the valley would rust. They would get water when the sea came in, when the sea left, they would be exposed to the air, they would oxidize, and you get this dark red color. And so all of the rocks that develop in the valley have this dark red hue to them. So at Bowman's Hill, by the visitors' garden, they have, by the visitor center, they have kind of a garden, like a version of all the, many of the native plants that they grow there, like in a miniature version. And they have two parts to the garden. One shows the sedimentary rocks of the area, which are this red shale, and the other part shows the volcanic rocks, which is diabase. So the shale, as I said, were created from sediments and washed off the mountains, filled in the valley, and then were oxidized, basically the iron and rusted. So it's just like if you have a cast iron skillet and you wash it out and you forget about it, you leave it on the sink and it dries, the water evaporates, and then you're left with the rusty sediment on top of the skillet. Same thing happened to these rocks. Okay, and then from those fissures that developed as the continents were separating, the magma came up to form these volcanic ridges. And they're made of a rock, an igneous rock called andesite. Diabase. Andesite's another igneous rock. Diabase. You're like, what's he talking about? Doesn't say that up there. So the Newark lowland is the eastern part of these Triassic lowlands, and it's the classic Bucks County landscapes. So the farmscapes with the preserved farmland and the red shale driveways and the ridges behind them, the small farms and narrow valleys. That's part of the Triassic lowlands. When you move into this part of the Piedmont, the landscape changes. And these are the things I like to teach people so they can go out and start seeing them for themselves. It's more of a patchwork. It's a patchwork of little farms and forests and ridges. And it's just a more broken up landscape than you see when you're driving through the upland and lowland provinces. There's a narrow strip of these Triassic lowlands that runs through parts of Lebanon County and other areas in the center part of the central part of the Piedmont. And one of the neat things that's located in this part of the lowlands is Mount Gretna, which is a scaled-down version of the Chautauqua Institute in western New York. If you've heard about that, it was built in the 1800s. It's basically a village, and people go there to hear lectures and engage in workshops and put on plays. And it's a beautiful spot right on Lake Chautauqua, which is near Lake Erie. This is a miniature version. It was a very popular thing. They would take it on the road, and sometimes other communities would build their own mini version of Chautauqua. And so Mount Gretna is one of those, and it has programs in these cottages in the woods, and amphitheater, and other places just like Chautauqua does. Okay. Also nearby is Cornwall, which is a town, a Welsh miners' village, which had the longest, and I'm not sure if it was the largest, but it was the longest running iron mine in Pennsylvania. Before the big iron mines opened up in northern Michigan and northern Minnesota, a lot of iron was mined locally. And so throughout Pennsylvania, you have these iron forges, and the Cornwall mine was one of the longest ones. it actually ran into, I think, the 1960s or so before it was just flooded out and it wasn't worth getting the water out of it to continue mining in it. And then if you go down to the southern end of the Triassic lowlands, these same ridges that you see in Bucks County and that Mount Gretna are built on were also fought over in the Civil War. So Cemetery Ridge is one of those diabase ridges that runs through the Triassic lowlands. Okay, time to move on to the second part. How are we doing on time?
About 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. So, we learned a lot about the southeastern part of the state. Let's run through the rest. Get your sneakers on, we're going running. The Great Appalachian Valley is the eastern edge of the Ridgeon Valley. The Ridgeon Valley is widest in Pennsylvania. It was created from the Allegheny orogeny. And then remember I said that these mountain slopes do not conform to the underlying rock layers. And that's because it was water acting on the different rock layers that created these ridges and valleys. It wasn't the actual mountain building itself, event itself, but that set up the conditions for water to erode away the softer rocks and leave the harder rocks behind. So you get these ridges here, and here's the tilted rock layers. You can kind of see how it's on its side on the top of Jack's Mountain. Okay, so the hard rocks on Hawk Mountain are the sandstone and the conglomerate, which is little pebbles in it. And like I said, the limestone and shale, softer rock, and they form the valleys, the Brush Valley in eastern Center County, and another valley from the Herringbone Mountains ridges in the south of Lewistown. Okay. So almost all of the landscapes you see today in Pennsylvania were created by water. So I like this quote from Lao Tzu saying, "Water is the softest thing, yet it can penetrate mountains and earth." It clearly shows the principle of softness overcoming hardness. And given time, it will wear down even the hardest of the ridges. The gaps are found throughout the ridges. This is the Callan's Gap, which carves through Tuscarora Mountain, which is a very considerably formidable ridge. Sometimes people make their own cuts. This is Sidling Hill down in Maryland. Sidling Hill also runs up into Pennsylvania. This is a gigantic road cut that was built for the interstate. Let's look at the Blue Mountain section, which is right here, and the Appalachian Mountain section, which is over here, throughout southern and central Pennsylvania. Blue Mountain section, it's only one or two valleys wide. This is the view from the north overlook of Hawk Mountain looking west. So you can see there are some valleys with little hills within the valleys, and then there are bigger ridges to the west. The Appalachian Mountain section has the really spectacular ridges. This picture again is from the top of Tuscarora Ridge. This is the New Lancaster Valley north of 322 around the town of Milroy. If you go up north from there, there's a state park called Reed's Gap, and then you can keep going up into this valley. This is what all of Pennsylvania looked like before it was turned into farmland. Another view, Route 30 in the southern part of the state. There's the toe of Front Mountain. Beautiful state parks in the area. Callan's Gap, Reed's Gap, and Greenwood Furnace, which is south of State College. Juniata River runs through the Appalachian Mountain section. This was one of the major ways that people, the European settlers got into the central part of the state, were able to move into some and start towns in some of the central part of the state before 1800. A couple of the towns along the way, Loganton in the Sugar Valley, which is east of State College, beautiful area, and Lewistown, county seat of Mifflin County. And there are some really small towns. And as the names of these towns suggest, these were kind of the frontier in the 1750s, 1760s. So they were at the front line of Indian raids, retaliations by the English settlers. Burnt cabins refers to settlers' cabins that were burnt because they were illegal in an area that wasn't supposed to be settled. And then Fort Littleton refers to a fort, which was often just someone's house that settlers could go to when there was trouble. Let's look at the anthracite upland. This is just on the east side of the Susquehanna River, but it has coal. And it's coal that has been part of that mountain building process, so it's folded into these layers and it's compressed and it's very hard anthracite coal, which is pretty rare. And because anthracite coal burns a lot cleaner, Philadelphia never got as dirty as Pittsburgh. But it also meant that industrialization couldn't develop as quickly because anthracite coal couldn't be burned in steam engines. They had to figure out how to do that, and that took several decades. Really interesting little towns. I love driving through this area. It's just a world unto itself. And of course, it's experiencing a lot of economic hardship because there really is not much of any anthracite coal mining going on. One of these interesting things, Wampanoag City is the site of the first cable television service in the country, created in the 1940s. The company's still there. Pioneer Coal Mine and Tunnel in Ashland, beautiful little park, town park up on the side of the hill. There's the mine tunnel. There are several museums, and Centralia is in this area as well. Centralia is the town that had the coal mine, has the coal fire burning underneath it. Because these seams are not level, it's impossible to put these things out or to even know where exactly they are. And just past Centralia, on the hill past it, there's this church where people who used to live in Centralia gather every year for a kind of reunion. Okay, so that's this area. And then there's another part of the anthracite region, which is the Wyoming Valley. And that's where Scranton and Wilkes-Barre and all those big cities are. Let's talk about the Susquehanna lowland. This is in the northern part of the ridge and valley. And there's more shale in this area, so a lot of it's been carved out. It's much more open field. It has a lot of farmland, dairy farms. It's a beautiful part of the state. A lot of Amish farms are there. I have a friend who lives up there near Lock Haven. I would love to live up there. It's inexpensive, and there's good food from Amish farms, and it's very scenic, picturesque. So Danville, this is on the north branch of the Susquehanna River. Lewisburg also. Mifflinburg, home of the Buggy Museum. If you've ever seen a museum dedicated to buggies, there's one in Mifflinburg. It's not open every day, so plan ahead. And a town around Kenn's Creek where there was a massacre back in the 1700s. Lock Haven, beautifully situated on the west branch of the Susquehanna River. You have the plateau to the west, and to the east you have Bald Eagle Mountain, which is a long ridge that, like Tuscarora Mountain, is a very substantial ridge, curves all the way up around to Williamsport. Then dividing the two parts of Appalachia is the escarpment or the Allegheny Front. So this is on the back side of the Ridge Valley, and it's an exceptionally steep hill in most places. Around Lock Haven it's a lot smaller and carved up. But one of the places you can experience this hill, the shift between the plateau and the Ridge Valley, is the escarpment at the Allegheny Portage Railroad National Historic Site. This is the ramp that they hauled canal boats up on a railroad track with horses pulling cables to haul the canal boats up to get them over onto the plateau when they would go on the canals and rivers that would take them down to Pittsburgh. And that's this section here, and then the escarpment goes all the way up to there. Also, another location on the escarpment up in the northeast by Scranton is Ritten's Glen State Park. The Kitchen Creek falls over to the escarpment and creates all these waterfalls. The Portage National Railway, National Historic Site rather, and just after that was built, the railroads came in. So it was only in use for 10 or 20 years, and they created the horseshoe curve, which is still in use. This gets you up part of the escarpment. And if the train's long enough, you can look out the window over here and see the back of the train over here. And the Appalachian Plateaus, all these parts to the west and around to the north. I don't have all of them covered, but we'll run through a few of them. So basically what happened was you had all these folded rock layers in the ridge and valley as the continents were coming together and they were getting crushed and compressed and twisted. And then there was this giant ramp, a fault, that runs along where the Allegheny front is now. So all those compressed rock layers just slid out this front and ended up, there we go, got too excited there, ended up on top of the rock layers to the west. And that relieved all the built-up tension that was accumulating in the ridge and valley. And so you have much broader, gentler hills in the plateau. It seems steeper because the slopes are gentle enough for people to build on them. And so you have towns like Pittsburgh and Altoona and those places where you're going up and down these hills. And you might come to a place in the center of the intersection where it literally goes like that. That's because the slopes were a little bit gentler than in the ridge and valley, and so they built on them. In the ridge and valley, you just go around the ridges or through them in the gaps. In the southwest, in the Allegheny Highlands, the Laurel Highlands, you have the highest point in the state, which is Mount Davis. It's up almost 3,000 feet. Johnstown is another city in this area, the steel mill, the old steel mill at the edge of downtown. And instead of having a department store, you now have a Dollar General. But you still have George's, the oldest record store in America. And then the Incline. Most of my pictures of western Pennsylvania is cloudy and overcast weather. And there in the summer or winter, it always seems to be overcast. And it does have the most overcast days of any part of the state. So there's a lot of small towns that I've explored. It's an interesting area. Get off the I-80, you'll be amazed at what you discover. The northern tier is this area of the counties across the northern part of the state, and it's part of the Appalachian Plateau. And it was primarily settled not from people from down southeastern Pennsylvania, but from people coming over from New England. And you can see that when you get up to the top of these, or when you go in the visitor center, it's in Mahoney State Park, and they have this model there, you can see that this really is a plateau. It's flat layers of rock, and they've been carved out by water to create these valleys and gorges. But when you're driving through it, it looks like mountains. You can also see it in this picture. This is one of the highest overlooks in the state. It's off of Pennsylvania 120 north of Lock Haven. It's called Hinder View State Park, and you have to drive up a narrow winding road to get up to the top there. And it's also a place where people go hang gliding from. There's a ramp there. And this is up in the Elk State Forest around the town of Emporium, which is one of my favorite towns up in the northwest. Allegheny River. Little tiny little ditch in Countersport near the source. Pretty wide stream by the time you get down the river to Foxburg. Allegheny River actually curves up into New York State and then comes down on its way to Pittsburgh. In the northwestern part of the state, you had glaciers. They kind of took off some of the mountaintops and they filled in the valleys and they filled it in with a lot of rich soil. So there's some good farmland in the northwestern part of the state. If you get to the unglaciated regions, it's poor soils with very short growing seasons. So the valley has to be lined perfectly in order to support a farm. So you don't see many farms. A lot of what did develop was manufacturing, a lot of small industries. You had obviously huge industries around Pittsburgh, but a lot of the other parts of the northern tier, you had a lot of small factories. Some of them are still there, some of them are being revived, but obviously they were hit very hard as the U.S. deindustrialized in the 70s. Towns up there, Coudersport on Route 6, Smethport on Route 6, Austin's a little town where you had the second worst dam collapse in the state. It was a concrete dam that was built around 1901. It broke apart. There are these huge slabs of concrete with rebar coming out of them about 100 yards down from the main dam. A few years ago, and there were lumber mills in the valley below it, and then the town below that. And so all the lumber that was in the mills got washed into town, just made a mess of everything. Killed a lot of people. The high school kids and the Historical Society created a park around the dam, which is really nice, and there's a lot of historic interpretation. Bradford, another town up there, is a center of oil and gas industry and home of Zippo lighters and case knives. The oil heritage region, oil was discovered there. A driller that was working for Colonel Drake drilled the first oil well, commercial oil well in the world. That was in 1859, and that was the beginning of today's global oil industry. Here's some of the towns up there. Really interesting place to explore. Franklin's another one of my favorite towns. Oil City is a real interesting downtown. This is the exchange where the oil market used to be located at the beginning of the industry. It's fascinating. There's nothing there now. It's a state park where you can bicycle or take a train through. So they market this area now as the Pennsylvania Wilds. A lot of state parks, state forest, the Allegheny National Forest in the west. Cherry Springs State Park is a dark skies park. It's one of the darkest areas in the Northeast. So all summer, every month when there is a new moon, that weekend, the weekend before, right after the new moon, they have a star party. And you can go up, serious astronomers have their own field over here, and then on the other side of the road, Pennsylvania 44, Jersey Shore Pike, because it goes from Jersey Shore up to Coudersport. Not the Jersey Shore, but Jersey Shore on the Susquehanna River, the town. WPA pavilions, which are really nice, and they have an amphitheater across the road, across PA 44, where the public can gather and hear presentations at the amphitheater and look at stars. The Lumber Museum is another cool place up on Pennsylvania 6. They have a lot of outdoor buildings, a sawmill, which they get up and operating about 3-4 times a year, and you just stand there watching it. Like, wow, this is so cool. They're pulling the log up the ramp in the sawmill, they're taking the bark off, squaring it off, slicing it into boards, stacking them and putting them out on the ramp to dry, and you just stand there and watch it. It's a fascinating process. Okay. Here we go.
Questions? You can take questions?
Sure. Yes. Sorry, let me go back to where
the first atlas that you showed.
Yes. This is DeLawrence, DELORME'.
We have one here in the library. What was the question?
Yeah, he was referring to alluvial fans, which exist in the west. It's a lot of sediment that's washed out into a fan-shaped deposit off of a bluff or a slope. The short answer to that is no, not on the current landscape, but a lot of those rocks that the sandstone and limestone and shale, or the sandstone and shale rocks that cover the whole western part of the state were originally part of an alluvial fan that washed off of the mountains that were to the east hundreds of millions of years ago. So yes and no. Yes.
I heard you were talking about the ocean funding going back out. As a geographer, what's your opinion on global warming?
Well, ocean levels have been rising, and what they're finding as the Arctic and Antarctic are affected, it's creating a positive feedback loop, which speeds up the process. So, as I have jokingly say to my students, you might want to invest in some property in West Philadelphia because it might be shorefront property. It was at one time. There's the fault line that divides the Piedmont from the coastal plain, and it runs through parts of Philadelphia. The coastal plain is made up of sediment that the ocean has washed up on top of the bedrock. And that's why there's so many potholes in Philadelphia. It's just sediment, it's not solid rock underneath the streets. So that means that, yes, at one time, the ocean washed all this stuff up to there, and that was the edge of the ocean. It was running through parts of West Philadelphia. If you know Bartram's Gardens, the fall line runs right through the front yard of his home. So yeah, so it could be, again, questions?
There are a couple of areas in eastern Pennsylvania where I guess the glacier came down and popped the rocks. I suppose it's what they call blue rocks. They're a place, one of the state parks.
Up in Hickory Run, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, so what happens there, they're not directly related to glaciers, but what happens is the boulders up on the ridge top, and if you hike the escarpment trail at Hawk Mountain, you can actually see this along with other ridges. The water gets in there, and in winter it freezes in the cracks and it pushes the stones apart and starts to break them up. So gradually over time, these huge chunks of rock break off the ridge and they tumble down into the valley. Eventually they end up piling down into the valley, and it creates those boulder fields that you see at Hickory Run and also at Hawk Mountain, which is near Blue Rocks. They're not directly from glaciers, but the glaciers were nearby, and when the glaciers melted, it released tons and tons of water, as you can imagine, and that pushed a lot of these rocks down into the valley, as well as it also created the weather that allowed for a lot of freezing and thawing, because it was always very close to the freezing point near these glaciers. The water was constantly freezing and thawing, and that speeded up the process of breaking these rocks on the ridge apart.
A lot of these rocks are rally off.
And that's the effect of water over time and water rolling past them. If you do have any other, yeah.
I think probably be southwest of here, probably south of Pottstown, there's a lot of areas with rocks, and like the farmers have put them into on the edge of the fields. But then the areas where that hasn't been done, like they're all strewn over every place. And they're darker rocks. Is that the diabase kind of rock, or is that something else?
A lot of places, like in like out past Carlisle and over toward Tuscarora Mountain in South Central Park, there's a lot of limestone outcrops that come up through the state, around Greencastle and Hanover and that area. And you see a lot of limestone cropping up through the surface. The darker rocks could be diabase. They are often dark gray or black.
Right.
Yeah, so I'd have to know exactly where it is to tell you for sure.
Yeah, it's like northern Chester County, but along, it's not far from Route 100 as it goes from Pottstown down to the middle of Chester County, like the northern part of
Yeah,
Chester County.
that's the Triassic lowlands, so those would be diabase ridges, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that area well. There used to be, when I took my classes up Hawk Mountain, there was, when you went up Route 100 and you hit the boundary between the Piedmont Upland and the Triassic Lowlands, the road turned red right there because they used local rock to pave it, and the local rock was the red shale. But then they repaved it, and so it ruined my whole story because it's dark colored, it's just black asphalt, and you have to get up to 422 to see the red paving. Anything else?
When you were talking about that northern tier, the northwest, remind me of, I recently researched crayon and alpha line. So I moved up there to work on a paper mill around 1900. Apparently there was one huge paper mill in Johnsonburg.
There is still a paper factory there, yeah, a manufacturing company there, and they cleaned it up so it doesn't smell terrible when we drive through the town anymore. But I always remember that because my dad's from northwestern Pennsylvania, western New York State, so we drive up through there. I always remember going through Johnsonburg. That and Boot Jack Hill coming into Ridgeway. It's a very steep descent right into the town. A couple houses at the bottom, you have to do a right turn. So they built another road just for trucks to go a different way rather than down that road into town.